On an overcast morning in mid-June 2025, USS Princeton was conducting a routine presence patrol, an ordinary, planned, legal transit in international waters. Nothing unusual, until her air search picture started to look wrong. A surface contact, designated by radar as a modern guided missile destroyer, had been holding position at long range for hours. Then, in a sudden burst, it increased speed and altered course as if it had received a timed instruction. The move wasn't an open attack. It was worse than that, it was designed to create uncertainty. In the ship's Combat Information Center, operators exchanged short confirmations. The track was stable, the signature was consistent, the range was closing. Not fast enough to be already lethal, but fast enough to become political, dangerous, and fast enough to trigger the choreography every major Navy trains for. At the next watch change, the tactical action officer did what professionals do, separated emotion from math. The platform had capabilities. The timeline mattered. So did merchant traffic, tankers, carriers, and container ships that depended on predictable freedom of navigation more than anyone wanted to admit. The question wasn't whether the contact could escalate. The question was whether it would. Instead of reacting theatrically, the US Navy did what it had refined for decades: integrated sensors, shared track data, and executed pre-planned defensive posture. Helicopters remained ready. Fighter coverage maintained a protective buffer. Nearby escorts shifted to enhance surveillance and layered reaction options, not to seek a fight, but to prevent one from happening on someone else's terms. Across the group, threat data propagated quickly. What one platform saw, others could corroborate. Where uncertainty crept in, procedures demanded confirmation. It wasn't hesitation, it was discipline. Minutes later, the air picture changed again. Aviation not far from the region began to appear on the perimeter, launch activity that didn't yet equal attack, but clearly signaled pressure. From above and from shipboard, the US side observed patterns, climb profiles, routes that suggested intent to test response times, and aircraft behavior consistent with a demonstration campaign. Under the waves, too, something started to feel over-coordinated, like a rehearsal that didn't know it was being watched. Acoustic systems registered anomalies, contacts whose behavior indicated they were not merely drifting in the background. The overall picture became less about a single ship and more about a synchronized intimidation package, a surface component to approach, an air component to complicate identification, and an undersea component to test the perimeter. At this point, the critical difference between disciplined forces and impulsive forces emerged: restraint. The commanding officer requested status updates with firm clarity, engage procedures were reviewable, but escalation was not automatic. The Americans weren't blind. They also weren't in a hurry to create the very incident their opponents were trying to manufacture. For a brief period, the confrontation looked like it could tip either way. Then the US side made a choice that didn't satisfy anyone's desire for drama. They stabilized the situation by tightening surveillance, strengthening defensive posture, and making every escalation step visible and attributable. The US posture became unmistakable to any observer. Aircraft operated with clear lanes and standard profiles. Ships maneuvered to improve tracking. Electronic warfare assets adjusted to preserve the integrity of the battle space, confusing some signals, protecting others, and ensuring friendly sensors stayed reliable. From the other side's perspective, that meant the display they wanted to stage, panic, misidentification, sudden chaos, didn't arrive. Instead, the response was predictable, professional, and coordinated. Later, an interaction in the airspace grew close enough to be risky. A fighter element broke from its expected pattern, attempting to provoke a reaction. But the American response was not to chase the provocation. It was to manage it, intercept with standard separation, maintain safe geometry, and deny the challenger the outcome it was trying to force. The moment passed. No shots. No headlines of "First Blood." Just procedure executed so cleanly that it became its own message: we control escalation by preventing it. When the undersea element finally drew attention, surfacing briefly for effect, U.S. tracking systems and aviation coordination confirmed what already seemed apparent: the U.S. Navy wasn't merely guessing. It had persistent awareness, and it could demonstrate capability without turning the encounter into irreversible violence. The surface fleet maintained composure while messaging continued through transparent, lawful channels, announcements, position reports, and standardized communications. The goal wasn't revenge. It was containment. In the afternoon, the U.S. Navy increased visible activity, aircraft sorties expanded, command and control coverage tightened, and the sky became crowded, not with weapons fire, but with the operational reality of a force that could defend without improvising. Electronic and sensor management disrupted the opponent's attempt to create confusion. Real-time track sharing prevented friendly forces from duplicating the same uncertainty. The result: the Challenger's story about overmatching didn't survive contact with coordinated multi-domain oversight. By late afternoon, the pressure campaign shifted into retreat. Not a humiliating collapse, but a controlled disengagement, an outcome that often matters more than victory, because it denies the originator the political payoff they wanted. In subsequent official statements, everyone used the same words: exercises, routine activity, scheduled events. But operational behavior told the truth. The intimidation package had tested boundaries, then found that the boundaries were reinforced by discipline, integration, and restraint. The lesson wasn't that any navy is perfect. It was that modern escalation is expensive, especially when the target is trained to prevent escalation from turning into catastrophe. In international waters, even a staged provocation can become a warning. And sometimes the most powerful deterrent is not firing a shot, it's ensuring everyone understands, in real time, that escalation won't buy the aggressor what it came for. Bye for now.